A number of persons have asked me to explain in what way the Maroons perpetuated slavery. And first, let me just say this. I do not agree that the Maroons helped to perpetuate slavery. And I will explain. Maroons existed from as early as 1655 in Jamaica. When Jamaica was captured by the British from the Spaniards, there were a number of enslaved Africans working as slaves for the Spaniards. Those enslaved Africans fled into the hills and became Maroons. All right. Now, the Maroons became a thorn in the British flesh because they engaged them in guerrilla warfare for a number of years, from about 1728 to 1739 and 1740. All right. Firstly, let me just say that there were two distinct groups of Maroons on the island at the time. You had the Leeward Maroons, who were those Maroons who lived in the western part of Jamaica, Trelawney, St. James, Westmoreland. And then you had the Windward Maroons, who lived in the eastern part of the island, the Blue Mountains, Moortown, Scots Hall, and Charlestown, right? Those Maroons in the Blue Mountains were led by Queen Nanny, and the Maroons in the western part of Jamaica, they were led by Cudjo, a fierce warrior. It is said that both Cudjo and Nanny came from the Akan people, and they were considered to be fierce warriors. All right? Very independent type people. Now, in 1739, the Cudjo Maroons, that is the Maroons from the western part of Jamaica, signed a peace treaty with the British. And among the terms of the treaty were that, one, they would get their autonomy, they would get their freedom, they would be granted lands, some 1,500 acres of land. They would ensure that runaway slaves be returned to their rightful masters, and they would assist in the suppression of revolts and future revolts. All right. The Maroons now, from the Nanny Maroons from the eastern part of Jamaica, their peace treaty was signed in 1740, and it said that they would ensure that the runaway slaves be returned to their masters, and they would maintain order in the colony. Maintain order in the colony, right? Now, that was a bit vague, but it did not contain anything about suppression of revolts. Now, the Maroons in the western part of Jamaica, right? After a while, some 56 years later, in 1795, they became disgruntled because the British had appointed some superintendents who they claimed were suppressing the Maroons and oppressing them and treating them harshly and violating their rights. They were not living up to the terms of the treaty, which recognized these people as freed people, right? So the Maroons became disgruntled. And so, you know, feelings begin to fester. Now, two Maroons from the Cudjo Maroons were accused of stealing pigs, and the British authorities ordered that they be flogged. But instead of executing the flogging themselves, the British authorities ordered some enslaved Africans to whip the Maroons. And of course, this was a great insult. That was the straw which broke the camel's back. And of course, the Maroons rebelled and engaged in their guerrilla warfare, because they were experienced guerrilla warfarers and they knew the cockpit country inside out. All right. Now, the British soldiers, on the other hand, did not leave any stones unturned. They deployed 1,500 soldiers. They even got hunting dogs from Cuba. They imported into the island to track down these Maroons. And after a few months, the Maroons were led to surrender in exchange for the promise that they would be given amnesty. They surrendered. The British authorities did not live up to their end of the bargain. They instead captured the Maroons and deported 550 of them to Nova Scotia in Canada. And they did this in the dead of winter as a form of punishment. After they went to Canada, vast majority of them were deported to Sierra Leone in Africa. And today you still have descendants of Maroons who were deported from Nova Scotia in Sierra Leone, and you still have the descendants of Maroons who went to Nova Scotia from Jamaica. All right? So what is the moral of that story? Oh, I must say this, that the Maroons in Moortown, which were led by Queen Nanny, they maintained some autonomy, and they remained peaceful, but the British did not allow any more Maroon insurrection in the island, because they were crushed bitterly. All right? So what is the moral of this story? Never try to become an ally of your enemies. The British government were always the enemies of the Maroons, but they because you'd say pragmatic agreements were made in the circumstances, they became a kind of internal police force for the British government. But the British government did not see them in the same light as the Maroons saw the British government. All right? So that's the moral of this story. I hope I was able to shed some light on the history of the Maroons. Have a blessed day until we meet again. Amen.